will be the first to meet me. And so for the next few years after the death of the Prophet, they will all line up against a wall and they would measure their hands. They would have the hand put in who has the longest hand. Eventually Zaynab was the first to die. They understood what the Prophet said by the longest hand, the one who spends the most. The one who spends the most, because she was the one who would spend the most. And so they realized what the Prophet ﷺ meant. When did the Prophet marry Zaynab? Lots of reports, but inshallah, the strongest opinion is that it took place in the beginning of Dhul Qa'dah of the 5th year of the Hijrah. Dhul Qa'dah of the 5th year of the Hijrah. And we know this for multiple reasons. Most importantly, the verses of hijab were revealed on the night of the wedding of Zaynab and the Prophet ﷺ. The verses of hijab came down. Before the wedding of Zaynab and the Prophet ﷺ, there was no hijab. So women did not wear hijab. They did not cover themselves the way that the Sharia required them to cover, because there was no Sharia revealed at that time. So when was the Sharia of hijab revealed? The night of the wedding of Zaynab and the Prophet ﷺ. That was when ayatul hijab came down. And we know in other reports that the ayatul hijab came down in Dhul Qa'dah of the 5th year of the Hijrah. We also know for a fact that the marriage took place before the slander of Aisha, because Aisha mentions Zaynab protecting her tongue during the slander. So definitely before the slander, and therefore to say it occurred in the Dhul Qa'dah of the 5th year of the Hijrah, inshallah it fits in perfectly. We also know, before we get to the controversial stuff, we also know that Zaynab's walima was the most luxurious walima out of all of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. That this is mentioned in all the books of hadith, that the best walima that the Prophet ﷺ gave for any of his wives was that for Zaynab. And they asked Anas, what was the walima? He said, meat and bread until all the people were filled. Meat and bread, which is basically what our walima is. I told you many times they had no rice. The Prophet never ate rice in his life. Rice only came to the Sahaba when they conquered the Persian and the Roman Empire. So the Prophet never ate rice. So what was the luxury? Bread. The staple starch was the bread, and then meat. And so he had all the meat and all the bread, which is to this day, this is what a walima and aqiqah is, right? And that was only for Zaynab. For most of the other wives, they did not have the capacity to sacrifice an animal. It was just whatever other food was available. But for Zaynab, he invited everyone. He sent Anas ibn Malik he gave a whole list, as the riwayat go. Call Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali. He gave a whole long list. Then he said, go to the people of the Suffah. Then he said, go to the masjid. Then he said, go in the pathway. Then he said, anybody whom you meet, call him. And so everybody came. And they ate from a small dish. And Anas says that I thought the dish would take care of 2 or 3. But wallahi, over 70 people ate from the dish. And when they all finished, it was still the same amount as it had in the beginning. Therefore, the story of the marriage of Zaynab is something well known, and the way I'm going to discuss the story is actually do it in this manner. We'll first discuss the verse in the Quran, then we'll look at the books of hadith, then we'll look at the books of seerah, then we'll look at the books of tafsir, and we'll go in chronological order. Okay? We'll look at the Quran. What does the Quran have to say? Then we'll look at the books of the 6 books of hadith, and then we'll look at the books of seerah, and then we'll look at the books of tafsir. And as for the verse in the Quran, the primary verse, in fact the only verse that explicitly mentions this, is Surah Al-Ahzab verse 37. Surah Al-Ahzab verse 37. And what does Allah say? And this is right after Ahzab 36, which is, according to the majority opinion, also regarding Zaynab. That no believing man or woman should ever have a say once Allah and His Messenger have decided to do something. The majority interpretation, this also relates to Zaynab's marriage to Zayd. Now verse 37. Now you need to memorize this verse, or at least the translation. وَإِذْ تَقُولُ لِلَّذِي أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِ. And remember when you said to the one whom Allah has blessed with Islam, and the one you have blessed by freeing him and adopting him. وَإِذْ تَقُولُ الَّذِي أَنْعَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِ أَمْسِكْ عَلَيْكَ زَوْجَكَ. Keep your wife. وَاتَّقِ اللَّهِ, and fear Allah. So the Prophet is telling Zayd, keep your wife, do not divorce her, and fear Allah. وَتُخْفِي فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا اللَّهُ مُبْدِيهِ. And you hid in yourself, in your heart, that which Allah would make clear to the people. So the Prophet is telling Zayd, keep her, Fear Allah, do not divorce her. But as you said this to Zayd, there was something in your heart that you were hiding. That which you were hiding, Allah would make it known to the people. وَتَخْشَى النَّاسِ. Why did you hide it? You were fearful of the people. You didn't want the people to speak. وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَى. But Allah has the ultimate right that He should be feared. You shouldn't have been scared of the people. And this is an itab, this is a minor rebuke about for the Prophet ﷺ, that why were you scared of the people? You should have been scared of me, not scared of the people. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِّنْهَا وَطَرًا. Now, pause here, completely irrelevant to this story. Well, not completely irrelevant, but it is not directly relevant to the marriage. The only Sahabi ever mentioned by name is Zayd, right here in this verse. Ever. No Sahabi has the honor that Allah mentioned him by his name in the Quran, other than Zayd. And this is the biggest blessing that Allah has given Zayd ibn Haritha. Right? That Allah mentions him by his name. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ. Even Abu Bakr comes a distant second compared to this, that Allah references him with the direct pronoun. And Allah calls him Sahib, which is still good, but you can't compare to Zayd. Right? And it is narrated that when the Prophet ﷺ died, one of the Sahaba remarked, had Zayd been alive, we would never have chosen Abu Bakr over him. That it was an obvious choice, if Zayd had been alive, that we would have chosen Zayd to be the next, the first Khalifa, right? So Zayd's maqam, unfortunately, is not known amongst many of the Muslims because he died in the 8th year of the Hijrah, right? He died, as we'll talk about, very shortly, maybe 2-3 weeks is going to come the incident of the death of Zayd. So Zayd died, it was a huge tragedy, the Prophet was crying, he was visibly grief-struck. And because of this, so most of us, we don't understand the maqam of Zayd. Who is Zayd? And what is the maqam of Zayd? Allah mentions him by name in the Quran. So when Zayd finished off, فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا, قَضَى وَطَرَهُ is an Arabic expression which basically means divorce took place. There's no need to get into the linguistics, it's a deep meaning which no need to get into. When Zayd divorced her, let's just translate it like this. قَضَى وَطَرَهُ has other meanings, but the implication, when Zayd divorced her, فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا زَوَّجْنَاكَهَا. We married you, we married her to you. زَوَّجْنَاكَهَا. Once Zayd's divorce has finalized, we marry her to you. So that there is no haraj, there is no problem for any believer to marry the wives of their adopted sons, أَدْعِيَائِهِمْ, once they have divorced them. And of course, this is we understand one of the wisdoms behind this, that nobody denies that quote-unquote adoption is not the same as a biological son. And a quote-unquote adopted son is never going to take the status of a real son. So the real son's wife becomes a mahram. But the adopted son's wife does not become a mahram. The biological son's wife and the biological daughter's husband becomes a mahram for the parents. Right? But not somebody that you have raised as an orphan and he's not your biological son or daughter, that doesn't become a mahram. So Allah is saying, so that there should be no problem after this, that anyone wants to marry an ex-wife of the adopted son or an ex-husband of the adopted daughter, now one of them wants to marry, that is something that is allowed.